Mrs. Swanson. I'm the school nurse at Haskin Elementary, and I am here to read chapter number 5 to you. I'm so excited I was asked to read to all of you. I have 2 grown children who I used to read to every night, so I'm excited I get to read a chapter again. So let's get started with chapter 5. Did you have a nice weekend? I asked Og when my cage was back on the table Monday morning. Boing, boing, he said. He sounded cheerful, but I'm sure he missed me. We started the day with language arts. We were studying words that sound exactly the same but can be different meanings when they are spelled differently. Mrs. Bisbane wrote the word for them on the board, homonyms. I hope that word is never on a spelling quiz. These are words such as grown and grown or ate and ate. Mrs. Bisbane also wrote funny sentences on the board. The monkey ate 8 bananas. The boat stored had a sail. These words can be pretty funny if you get them mixed up. For instance, if you hear someone say, "Don't touch the hair on my head," you might think they were saying, "Don't touch the hair on my head." But that would only make sense if the person happened to have a rabbit on his head. Humans have a pretty funny language, and it's a lot more complicated than squeak, squeak, squeak. Mrs. Bisbane said there would be a quiz coming up, so I made sure to write down all the words. Two, blue, blue, beat, beat. Hurry up, Harry raised his hand. I have one for you, he said. My dog told the flea to flee. Mrs. Bisbane liked that one. I did too. Harry has such a good imagination. She gave us an assignment to come up with a sentence using homonyms of our own. Then we moved on to science. I already knew about gravity, but now Mrs. Bisbane talked about force and mass. I was unspeakably confused when she talked about push, pulling, and weight. Weight and weight would be a good words for our quiz. After lunch came the part of the day I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Bisbane asked my friends to open their writing journals. I couldn't wait to hear how my friends used their imaginations to make their writing even better. If I could fly like a speeding jet, I'd go to Winfield to see my friend Phoebe every day because I missed her so much, Holly read. We do all our favorite things. We pretend to be rock stars and sing along to our favorite songs. We'd play Monopoly and make smoothies. And we'd also make friendship bracelets because we're best friends. My parents said I could go visit Phoebe on spring break, but I wish I didn't have to wait. I wish she didn't have to wait either. I loved Thomas's story about going to 3 football games in one day and Simon's descriptions of all kinds of yummy Italian food. Cassie wrote, if I could fly like a soaring seagull, I'd fly to the nearest ocean and sit on the beach. The only sounds I'd hear would be the crashing waves and the cries of the other seagulls. It would be a peaceful place. I think even calm down Cassie, who's very excitable, would be calm there. But I think I'd have trouble relaxing with all those seagulls around me with their sharp beaks. Thank you, Cassie, Mrs. Bisbane said. It's important to write down something you really like to do. That's why your paragraph is coming along so well. And don't forget to keep adding more details. Joey, on the other pause, still seemed to be having much trouble with his paragraph, as I was. Mrs. Bisbane was encouraging, and Joey said he would try again. Why did everyone in the class have a good imagination except Joey and me? Then Mrs. Bisbane ran from the dragon book again. When Gil Goodfriend asked why he was chosen to help, Goldie said, because of your invention. Gil was puzzled. Goldie continued, we have a good view of Bumpshire from our cloud. We saw the amazing machine you built to turn snow into ice cream. We have never seen something so clever. Anyone who can figure that out is a person to help us. He explained the dragons had discovered an ancient book that held the secrets of how the last dragon's war had been won. But there was one big problem. The instructions were hidden in codes and riddles that the dragons couldn't figure out. Are you listening, Og? I squeaked to my neighbor. Codes and riddles. Og didn't make a sound. I think he was waiting to hear what happened next. Mrs. Bisbane turned the page and continued. If you can solve the riddle and work the codes, we can use special swords and shields to make the magic that only works in the sky, Goldie said. You are our only hope. Mrs. Bisbane's eyes grew wide as she read the next part. Gil's hands trembled as he opened the book. I think my paws were trembling too. Gil worked for days to figure out most of the codes and many of the riddles. But the most important discovery he made was this: the secret to controlling the dragons was to speak backwards. It was funny hearing Mrs. Bisbane trying to read that. From then on, when he commanded the bad dragons to stop the lightning or hail or whatever horrible weather they were creating, he said it backwards. That combination with the magic shield made everything the evil dragons did reverse the directions and strike their own cloud. By the time Gil left, the bad dragon's village was frozen solid. Cameron Cole, the author, must have had a brain overflowing with imagination. Castles, codes, shields, and secrets. But the sad thing was, we were almost at the end of the book. Sophie stayed after school to ask Mrs. Bisbane a question. I have some more ideas about the island with the parrots. I could hear the excitement in her voice. Is it all right if I write more than a paragraph? Of course, make sure everything you write fits in and it is important, Mrs. Bisbane replied. I will, Sophie said, because I had a dream about parrots. I told you. Yes, Mrs. Bisbane said as she turned towards the door. Sophie turned too. I've never had a parrot because, well, my parents said I have to wait, Sophie continued. Ugh, our teacher said, walking towards the door. Sophie walked with her. Oh, but I'd love to hear them talk, said Sophie. I'd like a dog, but they don't talk. Mrs. Bisbane nodded and opened the door. Put it in your paragraph, she said, and have a nice evening. Sometimes even I'm surprised by our teacher. She managed to be such a good listener and make sure Sophie didn't miss her bus all at the same time. Once the parking lot was empty, I jiggled the lock that doesn't lock and slipped under the door. I couldn't wait to hear how Gigi's weekend had gone. Since it was still early, she was awake. Oh, Humphrey, I was hoping you would come, she said. I raced toward the table and looked up. Did you have a good time, I asked. Yes, Gigi exclaimed. I had the best time ever. The humans were so nice, and they talked to me and played with me all weekend, and they were very gentle. I told you so, I squeaked. Now, I'll never worry about going home with a student, she continued. Nothing scary could happen to me. Nothing scary? How about an invisible bear, or maybe even a ghost? I decided not to tell Gigi about my weekend. Now you see how much fun it is to be a classroom pet, I said. I glanced up at the big clock on the wall. Oops, I gotta get back to room 26. Aldo will be here any minute. Come see me again, Humphrey, Gigi called. I got back to my cage a few minutes before Aldo arrived. I got an A on the test, he shouted when the lights came on. The best grade in the class. Congratulations, I squeaked. Boing, 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 Og said in his twangy voice. Aldo took a bow. Thank you, my friends, and now time to get to work. I always enjoy watching Aldo at work. He always does the things in the same order: dusting, sweeping, emptying the wastebaskets. He never forgets to sweep the corners of the room and underneath every desk. Sometimes he balances the broom on one finger. That's his favorite trick, but that night he amazed me by leaning his head back and balancing the broom on his chin. That's talent. Aldo always does his best job he possibly can. I try to do the same as my job as a classroom pet. But I wasn't doing a very good job on my writing. If Mrs. Bisbane had to give me a grade on my paragraph, she wouldn't give me an A or a B or even a C. That made me feel bad. When Aldo was gone, I got my notebook and I looked at what I had written. If I could fly, I'd fly like a speedy flying squirrel all over the world. I sighed. It wasn't any good. But even worse, it wasn't really true. Mrs. Bisbane had told us to write about something we would really like to do. I would not like to be a squirrel, not even a flying squirrel. I loved being a hamster. Maybe only humans have imaginations, I thought. But at Philippe's house, I imagined I'd seen a ghost, when all I'd seen was Philippe's nice mom in a white robe. That took a lot of imagination. So, if I could imagine bad things, why couldn't I imagine good things? I stared and stared at the page until I heard a loud rumbling sound. Boing, 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 Og said in a worried tone. The rumble was followed by a loud crash. Og hopped around his tank. Boing! I was too scared to squeak. Suddenly the rain began to pelt the window next to our table, and a bright flash lit up the room, followed by another loud crash. It was a thunderstorm. I don't like thunderstorms, but at least I knew what was making all the noise. At first I thought the rumbling was in my brain. I jiggled the lock that does not lock, headed down to over to Og's tank. Og, you all right? It's just a thunderstorm. You know what they're like. Og stopped hopping, stared at me with his big, bulgy eyes. Who knew what he was thinking, but he finally said, boing! I was pretty sure he understood me. Gigi might not know how noisy thunderstorms sound in these classrooms when you're all alone. She's probably afraid, I said. Will it be all right if I leave for a few minutes to go see how she's doing? Og stared at me again, but his head moved a little. It was almost like a nod. Boing! He agreed. Soon I was scurrying down the hallway again. All the rumblings, crashing flashes of light made my whiskers wiggle, but I didn't turn back. Once I was in room 12, I raced towards Gigi's cage. I figured that she wasn't sleeping at this time. Gigi, I squeaked at the top of my lungs, but there was a huge crash that rattled the windows, and I didn't think she heard me. So I grabbed the cord, swung up, and leaped onto the table. Gigi, it's all right, I said. It's a thunderstorm, part of nature, like we are. My friend was huddling in the corner. I think she was shaking. Don't be afraid, I said. Even though the thunder was loud, made my small ears throb. It won't last long, and it won't hurt. Are you sure? She said. She squeaked softly. Pretty sure, I replied. After all, I had to be honest. I'll stay here with you until it goes away. It wasn't long before the crashes sounded farther away and the flashes of lights weren't as bright. See, I said, it's moving on. The rain continued, but after a few minutes there was no more thunder or lightning. Thank you for staying with me, Gigi said. You're a good friend. Anytime, Gigi, I answered. You're a good friend too. But now I better see how Og is doing. I hope to meet him someday. Tell him I said hello. I'll do that, I said as I slid down the table leg and headed back to room 26. Og, are you all right? I asked when I got back to our table. I guess he was, because he was swimming around in the water side of his tank. Gigi said to tell you hello, I told him, and she said she hopes to meet you someday. Just then, Og leaped out of the water and said, boing! I guess he wanted to meet Gigi too. But how could a frog in a tank and a guinea pig in a lock that does lock ever come face to face? I rested for a while, and after a snack and a nice drink of water, I opened my notebook again. That thunderstorm had really rattled my brain. In fact, it felt like a thunderstorm in my brain, like a brainstorm. And a brainstorm was just what I needed. Mrs. Bisbane had said to write down things that we liked to do. She said to write down any ideas that came into our heads without stopping. So I wrote this down, things I like to do. I took a deep breath, and then there was rumbling in my brain. Under the heading, I wrote, be a classroom pet, help my friends with their problems, go to my friends' house, go to all kinds of interesting new places, help my teachers with their problems, have adventures outside of my cage, meet new friends, try new things, visit old friends like Phoebe, help everybody with their problems. My paw was getting tired, so I stopped and read what I had written. It was pretty clear that I'd like to have adventures with and help my friends. If I could combine these two things, I would be unsqueakably happy. Og, I think I had a brainstorm, I squeaked, or at least a brain shower. Boing, boing. Og sounded cheerful. And a brain shower is a start, I added. My writer's rumblings. At first there was some drizzle, then a lot of rain, then I had a big storm in my brain. Thank you all so much for letting me read this to you. I hope you all enjoy this book as much as I have. See you soon.